We want to welcome everyone here tonight. This feels a little
This is
strange.
pretty.
Right?
This is kind of distant.
They've got us on cue here. We can't move. So I'm Brett Taylor. I'm assistant professor here at this Bennett School of Education, and we wanted to do something a little different tonight. We, as a School of Education, have been attempting to build kind of an innovation center here in Sacramento. So 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, feels like 7. Rod started as an assistant dean, brought the Bennett School of Education here to Sacramento and started a doctoral degree. We've since added a master's degree in organizational effectiveness and learning and a master's degree in educational entrepreneurship will be launching this August. And so usually schools of education aren't really focused on innovation or disruption. They're usually focused on getting teachers and administrators prepared to teach and administrate. But we wanted to do something different. We wanted to shake up education. We feel like it's a system that's in dire need of change and evolution. And so that's what we've been doing here. And I did want to recognize our dean is here tonight, Dean Vanessa Sherrod. And yeah, I thought you were going to stand or something. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, act like you've been here, you know? So what we wanted to do tonight was start a series of bringing people who have done innovation in education and let them tell their story and speak a little bit to what they've done. When we decided we were going to do this, the first person that came to my mind for being someone who is a disruptor was Michael Hanson. And I have a long bio here. I'm going to skip it.
Yeah, please.
But
Please.
Yeah, what I'll tell you about Mike. Mike hired me, so of course I feel grateful to him as my first principal job, and then gave me an opportunity to build a school and do something totally innovative. So just for that right there, I had to bring him out here to talk about innovation. But Mike, almost 12 years at Fresno Unified. Right. Almost 12 years as the superintendent of Fresno Unified, which when we were there at first, it was the second poorest city in the country based on concentration of poverty. Mm-hmm. Very tough place to work. When Mike took over the reins,
Happy to move into number 2. We used to be the highest concentrated poverty in America. Yeah.
When Mike took over the reins, it was a school district who was in danger of bankruptcy and takeover by the state. And in less than 12 years, he was able to take, with his staff and faculty and teachers, was able to take the graduation rate from low 60% to higher than the state and national average of 85%. So Mike's done some great things, but I feel like where people don't give him enough due and credit is in this space of innovation and disruption. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. I won't talk too much. His wife, Julie, is here, who is always a support to him, but also an educational disruptor in her own right, I think. And then he's
yeah. Yes, that's true.
Yeah. Do you want me to say like this, like Harvard and stuff? Do you care?
No.
Okay.
That's fine.
So, well, let's get started. And I just want to first welcome and thank Michael Hanson for being here tonight and give him a warm welcome to our Educators Disruptor.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just first start by saying about my wife, Julie Montali, that she is way better at what she does than I am at what I do. She actually continues to push on things that continue to give me ideas about how we could possibly do things on bigger scales. So we both sit in chairs that have impact, her in the world of early learning and me running things from time to time. And it makes it good. It's a great partnership. So thank you, Julie. Nice to have you here and not chasing kids tonight. So where do you want to start?
Let's start with, I'm sure when I mentioned this topic of innovation and disruption, not only is it something that you're not given credit for, but I don't think you see yourself in that space. But forcing you to think about that space, like what is innovation in education? Why is that something we should care about?
Great question. So so innovation kind of tracks with people talking about entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial approaches to things. And I've never felt comfortable with that label. Innovation more so, I guess. For me, innovation is simply defined in education as just simply doing something different than the status quo that's in the current context. Right? We know the numbers that are getting turned out in different cities, schools, the school to prison pipeline stuff, the graduation rates, the kids can't read, they're not coming to school. What happens with schools rooted in cities with abject poverty? What happens with kids where their daily life is centered around one traumatic event after another, where they're victims of systematic and continual racism in their lives, where they live in a world of fractured relationships. And when you start to pile those things up, and I mean literally pile those things up, it's not hard to start trying to think about doing something different, because it's a pretty damning existence if you leave that that status quo alone. So I just define innovation as can we find some solution that looks better than what we're currently doing in this context? And in the write-up that went out, you mentioned 3 schools. And those, I'd like to make the point tonight that there are 3 schools that I can talk about and why they came about and how they came about and their backstories with all of them. And they matter. But there's also a whole bunch of work that we were trying to do at the system level that would endure, not just for 450 kids at Patino or just shy of 500 kids at Daly Elementary as a charter for K-5 IB, that would ultimately feed back into a new IB middle school that was under the contract in the district and feed to Fresno High as an IB high school. And the middle school, you'll see up here, I can start with that one because all of it does tie together. But I do think it's important when we're talking about this kind of topic that we try to root it in some kind of physical manifestation so you can have a visual of what we're talking about. Because when we talk about equity and access from my standpoint, and I see Jorge here as my colleague. Jorge, when Jorge came into the district in Fresno Unified from UC Merced to begin working on equity and access, I asked him what he needed, and he just needed Ray as a programmer. So he started with a department of 2 and gave him full access to everything. That was, and you don't have to supervise any departments. We'll just figure it out as we go. Last Thursday, because we do this, last Thursday we celebrated our 9th anniversary of working together. That may not mean anything to you, but it means something to us because it's been a long road. But that school, sitting up there, shot with no filters, by the way. I want you to imagine that across the street where you're sitting is a dirt field. Another neighboring school district would not let us build there, sued us. Tried to build it in another part of Southwest Fresno. Got absolutely and rightfully hammered by the community because it was next to a rendering plant, one of the few, I think, left on the West Coast. God awful. And then just to the left of it is an apartment complex, which is yet another school district. Just boundaries are messed up to no end. But for 35 years, and you'll see here that I was typing this right in the outer room here, so you'll see some tense agreement that we're just going to act like everything's perfect grammatically.
Why don't we put my English teacher stuff away right now?
Sure, for now. That school, for 35 years, our community, our boards of education, our superintendents, our community really said no. For those of you who don't know the Fresno area, there's this great thing, if you ever want to read it, it's actually the document that got me to go there. It was a benchmarking study done by Fresno business leaders called Choosing Our Future. They benchmarked Fresno against Garden Grove and Long Beach and said, we have kids that look just like them. Why aren't we performing like that? And when I read that, I said, if I don't go do this job, I will never be able to look myself in the mirror again. Because I've always said I'm about poor kids. I'm about EL kids. I'm about students who don't have a shot. So if I don't go do this, I'm not who I said I was. So that school represents, coming up on 40 years of overt racism. And what we did there, it's out of 15 middle schools in the town, that's the only community that did not have its own community middle school. West Fresno historically was black, West Fresno. Still, it's not anymore by demographics, but what goes on in West Fresno is still a marker for Black Fresno, Black Valley, our larger black community. When Edison High School, where my son went right around the corner, plays football and basketball games go on, people come from all over, didn't even go to Edison, because it's a place to congregate and catch up with what is going on in the African-American community on the valley floor. So that building was built right on top of something that was called the U. And it was notorious for decades. People could come in, they'd drive a U, pick up drugs, prostitutes, shoot, and it was the most dangerous neighborhood in the community. And so what we did was we knocked down a school just south of it that was poor performing. We took the U by eminent domain and worked with people, the housing authority, and we moved folks out and found them better housing. We took a small church, had about 35 people left in it, and I was a little nervous when I met a 98-year-old woman who still goes. And when she identified herself, I thought I was going to catch her cane up the side of my head because her church didn't exist anymore. And she said, young man, you did the right thing. Because I can go worship somewhere else, but the kids of this community have never had this, and they need this to believe in. So we bused these kids for decades to parts of the city they didn't want to go to parts of the city that didn't really want them. And then we wondered why. They didn't do well on their homework. They got kicked out of school a lot, and they became gang issues in West Fresno. So that is one example of, and we built the health clinic in on the side just because that was one of our most desolate parts of the city, poorest zip code in the state at the time. And that building right there that houses 1,000 beautiful kids. We have the street saints who are former gang members who work inside to keep kids straight. And the health clinic is the health home for every kid in that entire area, 0 to 19. I didn't find that to be particularly innovative. I found that to be doing the right thing.
And I'd say this on top of this, that's good to add. This building has won statewide and national architectural awards.
Yes.
And is one of the most technologically advanced schools I've ever been in. So it wasn't just giving them a place, it was giving them the best place.
Yeah, we made sure. I would drive my son to school, and they're like, man, why can't I go there? Well, because you're a sophomore in high school and it's a middle school is the obvious answer. But, we actually built a high school sized gymnasium. It's the only one in the city that had a high school sized gymnasium, because basketball was such a big part of the community spirit. And it's a phenomenal feat. The staff there does wonderful work. But that was almost just a backbreaker. I said when we went down the road that there were probably, 35 really good reasons why people had not done this for the last 25 years. And I said, by the time we're done, we're going to find all of those and about another 50. And we did. It was a bar fight to get it done. And it's now done. And I think people find the benefit in it. This one here is the school that Brett built. And
I didn't literally build it.
Your ideas are stamped all over this place. He was running Duncan Polytechnical High School that's got a lot of CTE, strong pathways in it. And I walked into his office one day and said, hey, what about this? And he did a little, I'm not going to say he almost passed out, but his knees got a little wobbly and he kind of fell back against his desk. He's like, I've only been here for, X amount of time. They're going to kill me if I try to leave. Everybody's motivated here. I don't know. I just can't. Within like 2 hours, he called me. He's like, I'm in. I want to do it. So this, like the other one, I think if there's anything creative we did is I have a tendency, some would call it a bad habit. I've learned to moderate it. But I tend to see dark spots. I see bad things in systems. I see holes. I see broken. And that's where my eye is drawn so that we can get it fixed. People have told me, man, Mike, you're always just finding things that have to be fixed, and that's, can be dispiriting for folks. I said, yeah, well, it's not for kids when you get them fixed, right? But I do realize you have to add in the fluff, nice feeling, all the rest of that stuff with it. But this here is a building that cost $12 million that sits right on top of what was the absolute worst contributor to the suspension, expulsion rate, and student dropout rate in Fresno Unified that we had. It was DeWolf Continuation School. And there was no continuation about it. Kids went, they hung a little bit, and then they disappeared. And every time I go to that place, staff seemed complacent isn't the word. I can't describe it, but this wasn't going to stand. So we knocked it down. And these are a couple of the things where I probably got ahead of the board a little bit. When they asked me, like, are we knocking down a building? Oh, yeah, I'll get that to you in a Friday communication. I thought I sent that already. And also funding this thing, we waited. I didn't put it to the board right out of the gate that we were in design, because board members wanted every dollar they could get for swimming pool pet projects in their own area. And this was a life-changing, I knew this was a life changer, right? So in the world of equity and access, where we were trying to get students ready to graduate with the greatest number of choices, post-secondary choices from the widest array of options, this thing was going to get built. And maybe, do you want to talk just a little bit about it very quickly?
So this is a high school of entrepreneurship. It's in the center of Fresno, and any student in Fresno Unified can attend there instead of their home high school. And every single student starts and runs a business while they're in school. They also learn how to code, and they learn social media tools. So 10th grade, they actually do an internship with a tech company where they build a website and social media campaign for small business. They launch a company by 11th grade, and in 12th grade, they're in a room a little smaller than this room, working on their companies all day, math, English, social studies, and entrepreneurship teacher are in the space with them, and everything's fully embedded in their business. So it's not when am I going to use this school? It's every day we use this. So
and we started with 10th graders on purpose. The Fresno Unified Board just voted to start now with 9th graders. But I was very clear with the board and Brett and everybody else, like, teach them to code and all the rest of that in 10th grade. 11th grade, they're learning lean startup, what it'll take to start a business. The 12th grade, they're going to run a business. And I was very clear, like, if these kids all run a business and they're making money and they're going out in the community and hiring other kids and whatnot, I will take that hit. If we get hit on our graduation rate because they're not here, or our college going rate because they're not going, I am fine with that, because we're producing to the bottom line in this, economically depressed part of the state. And why don't you give them the stats for where kids ended up?
Well, it's
because it was
interesting.
not about college. It was about getting them to work.
Yeah, one of the innovations in Fresno Unified, I'm glad Superintendent Aguilar is here. I'm gonna see if I can get this quote right. Widest array of widest.
You can't. You already stumbled.
You do it so well. What is it?
Greatest number of post-secondary choices from the widest array of options.
Right. So that's always been what he instilled at Fresno Unified. And so what we wanted to do here was make it that every kid would graduate A through G ready for college, but they also were ready to get employed right out of the gate. So the idea was, when people would say, is this for college going kids or is this for kids to get employed right out of the gate? We said yes, right? Yes, whatever they want to do. So we never made it a college prep school. I was just down there with the first graduating class this year. We'll be graduating in June, and I was just down there. 2 kids have entered the military. About 15%, a little over 15% are attending community college, and the rest all got into 4-year universities. And yeah. But this is I think the genius of it was we didn't push that, but by getting them into an engaged career that they wanted to study, a lot of them said, I'm doing this, I'm going to college because I need to for my career. It wasn't I'm going to college to go to college, right? And so they've engaged in something. And so when I was at Duncan Poly, Superintendent Aguilar was the one that really pushed, like, hey, I don't care if this is a career school, this needs to be A through G. They need to have the option. And so I'm so glad that he instilled that as part of the focus of Fresno Unified. But yeah, it's a very unique school. And why don't you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, what we did was Fresno State had a school for entrepreneurship that could have used an infusion. They started to look at some of what we were doing, saying, you're preparing kids for stuff that we're doing in college now. We did a partnership with them around something called Kids Invent in upper elementary school. Was it grade 4 or 5 or 5, 6? 5, 6. So that every kid had these Kids Invent team kind of lessons with great regularity once a week over the course of a year. And without exception, you would walk into a 5th and 6th grade classroom in Fresno Unified and there would be a Kids Invent wall, because it was like the biggest thing they were doing. They just loved it. Interdisciplinary teams. They would learn how to fail. They would learn how to pick themselves up and do the next thing. Like, how do we deconstruct what just happened? This team is not working well. What are we going to do about it? Like, they were getting a lot of this kind of job stuff early on without knowing it. And then in 6th grade, things were made a little bit more complex. And then they were all going to Fresno State for a huge tournament to see at the end of the year who could do what. And that was trying to build some awareness for them and some skills before they got into the middle school world of CTE, so that by the time they got to 8th grade, this was a legitimate and rational opportunity. It wasn't just what is that? They knew, hey, I've got some skills and some background here that I can make the choice to do this. We should make sure that they get the round of pictures in an email or something for folks who showed up. Because when you see the inside of this place, it's set up like a business, and they're great opportunities for youth. So this is another example where we took just a really desolate dark spot, knocked it down, and did the exact opposite right on the same ground as a declaration that our kids deserve the best.
And some of those kids who would have gone to DeWolf came to
Right there.
us.
Came here.
And I just actually, one of my favorite stories, I just talked to a girl last week who came to us with a 0.8 GPA. We weren't supposed to let her in because we didn't know if we'd be able to graduate her because we don't have a lot of the extra classes. And we said, we're going to make it work. She's now going to be attending Fresno State next year. So
Yeah.
instead of trying to have this continuation thing on the back end, like how do we engage students who traditional systems aren't working for on the front end? And that was, I think, one of the great things about the school. So question is, you talked about this a little at the beginning. This is a school of about, potentially 400 students. Yep. Gaston's 1,000 students. Daily, which you alluded to, daily charter is like 500 students. Yep. So 74,000 students in Fresno Unified. How does this work bleed into that?
Well, so I would start here. So the next slides are incredibly boring, but incredibly important, because all I did was I pulled books that were part of the journey that made this work. And they're not easy reads necessarily. They require it's difficult work and deep engagement and really committed learning over time. So this book here, What School Boards Can Do by Don McAdams, it centers on reform governance for urban schools. It's reform governance for board members, not staying in the world of small board policies or like updates of law that come across the board's desk the dais that they then need to update. These are, you need to take on big policies that can have a real impact on your district long term, and you work on them until you get them right over time with your senior staff. So we were lucky to get into this 2-year program, Broad sponsored some of it, and we had great trainers, and we probably had, I think, 4 or 5 offsites out of state. They treated us well in that we had really nice places to go and beds to sleep in, but they didn't let us sleep much. And we were doing like Harvard Business School case studies on urban districts all across the country. So a couple in Philadelphia, did Sac City, did San Diego, Houston, couple in Houston, St. Louis, Buffalo, you name it, we did it, Miami-Dade. And we were learning all these lessons about all the complexity of how this works. Ultimately, almost every one of those districts, when the thing fell apart, it was because they took their eye off the budget line and they got out of whack. They didn't listen to like the numbers, and they started to overreach, and it just fell apart. So this right here, I credit Choosing Our Future as a document with getting me to Fresno Unified in 2005. I credit this book and this 2-year training that we did, 5 offsites, but then they sent consultants to us for these intensive work sessions in the district where we were to write policies, and they kept us on track. And the policies that we put in place, they're going to sound a little, you're like, really? Yes, really. When you go deep and people understand them, it makes a big difference. When you do it the way we did it, it allows you to get from the boardroom down to the classroom with clarity. So it was the board's core beliefs and commitments. It was the board's 4 goals. Did them for 5 years, renewed them for another 5 years. So they're going to be running for 10 years straight. That gives the staff a long time to really focus and stay at these goals. And the goals are really simple. The 4 goals, I'll just tell you, all students will read, write, and do math at a high level. Number 2, all students will participate in arts, activities, and athletics. Right? Sounds nice. That's hard to do, and it costs money. The third is they will have opportunities to be workforce ready and have character to do so. And then the fourth one is they will stay in school on target to graduate, right? Easy to say, really hard to do. So they did core beliefs and commitments, they did goals. The next thing we did, and this was our senior staff, about four of us, along with the board, we did a theory of action for the district. How are we going to do this work to accomplish those goals? The board was right with us designing that policy. Then we did 2 more policies, but we were very wise to do them together and roll them out together. One was the district accountability policy. The other policy was the professional learning policy. So we were crystal clear. We're going to ask more of you, but we're not going to ask more of you here without giving you more support on the professional learning side. It's patently unfair to say, be great. Good luck with that, right? So those 2 got launched and developed at the same time, and then we had a data dashboard policy. We measured almost 50 things that were the foundation for my evaluation. That all came out of this book. I say that extended my time and my tenure in Fresno by 8 years at least. It was that important, and it was such a touchstone for us to go back to. This one, Updraft, Downdraft. This is a book that calls out inequity. It calls out all kinds of patterns, practices, and policies that exist in schools today that Marilyn Crawford documented. And we had Marilyn, I'd known Marilyn from a previous district. I did a little work with her on this, brought her in. She worked with counselors, she worked with senior staff in the district, she worked with all of us. And that book, especially the first 6 chapters, just cracks wide open these artifacts of schools, in particular master schedules. Who gets what classes? And in that process, we realized, like, oh my God, we've got 2 middle schools that really set kids up for a lot of A to G and then ultimately AP classes. We've got others that are going to make it such that a kid is going to end up with 6, 7, 8 fewer AP classes just because of the middle school they went to. We revamped middle schools as a result. But this counselors and scheduling largely went with this. I got to the district, and I think it was like 930 kids per counselor. We were on the verge of state takeover. The first thing we did is we were able to put money together as we were pulling things kind of back into a central office. And we ended up putting 300 positions out to school sites to help them. A good number of those were counselors, so that we brought that ratio down immediately to like 450, and then worked it down to, it was in the high 3s, 352, something like that, which is far better than the state average by a long shot, but needed to be if they were going to do the kind of work that we were asking them to do, and you'll see that in a few. So the board now has put these policies in place, right? You don't just disrupt or talk about something going to happen. You got to have a plan for it. Board puts these policies in place. We've got some tools from updraft, downdraft, but we really had to focus on our senior team, our cabinet. How are we working together? Do we have the right people on the bus? All of that. And that was probably the hardest thing. That book really calls out some hard issues for a leader to deal with. I think that was harder for me than it was for the senior leadership team. And building and sustaining senior leadership teams is brutal. I was fortunate that for the most part, the Fresno Unified Board was really supportive of helping me recruit when I needed to in creative ways. I was also very lucky. Ruthie Quinto as the deputy superintendent and CFO, and Kim Meekum, who was HR, labor relations for a decade before I made her chief academic officer. We were all together for my entire tenure. So when you've got your superintendent and the one with the money and the one with the people all together and they can finish each other's sentences and so on and so forth, or they know, don't take that to Mike because you know what happened? Do you remember October, 14 when we did that? Like, it's just a whole different vibe. This one here, before we started to ask of teachers something new and different in their classroom instruction, we knew from experience the first thing that teachers push back on, and rightfully so, is, hey man, I'll take feedback. I want to get better, but not from him or her. You got to give me a good supervisor. So we went in and spent 5 years training on supervision and evaluation. Now, we didn't wait 5 years before we started to press on instruction, but we actually invited our partners at FTA to come and sit in the first sets of trainings. They sat in there like, this stuff's great. If you get everybody to do this stuff, we're going to be in good shape. And significantly knocked down the number of opportunities where people were complaining about the work that was being done. So you can start to see, right, there are these big, you don't innovate just by saying, I'm going to innovate. You have to innovate as you're continually building strong foundations and strong structures and strong parts of a system that will hook together that will actually benefit you. This one, a book we read in our community. It's part of our collective impact work. Being clear that all youth are our kids. Not, when you're 90% kids of color, 90% poor kids, by virtue of employment, people aren't poor. Teachers, principals, and so on. When I landed in Fresno, 79% of our teachers were white, 21% teachers of color, teaching 90% students in poverty, 90% students of color. When I left, we went from 21% teachers of color to 45%. So the white teachers in Fresno are now 55%. The state average is 63%. Not there yet, but like everything else with equity and access, we really worked on diversifying the pools as much as we possibly could while holding the expectations high and building pipelines. This book, I think, is critical as we read it, and you'll see in the next slide, it's because of this. The issues around families in Chapter 2, parenting in Chapter 3, schooling in Chapter 4, Chapter 5 in community. These things were rich for conversation all across the city, whether it was the mayor, the chief of police, the universities, parents, it did not matter. It brought a lot of people into a conversation that we weren't having before. What I just said to everybody is Chapter 6 is where I believe the author falls down. Just was not satisfying. So for us, what's our Chapter 6? If you read that book, I challenge you, by the time you get to Chapter 6, put the book down and be thinking, what's our Chapter 6? Because your Chapter 6 is your specific community and what you need. This is another big lesson. Not only, the health clinic at Gaston, by the way, which was followed by, how many did we do? 4 or 6? 6. We did 6 more health clinics, 3 immediately and then 3 to come on later. Health clinics in the most desperate communities in the district. They weren't going to be as beautiful as the one built into a brand new school, but Valley Children's Hospital was going to be partnering in that. And that was one big issue that we took on. Another one was this notion of early childhood education. It's one of the things, everybody thinks Finland is fabulous. I went and did a visit with Finland with a great group of folks, and it was really clear, like nobody worries about medical issues there, and someone gets pregnant and a check starts showing up in the mailbox like right then. Do what you need for your child prenatal and then on until school age. So this goes from the nurseries and tracing the roots of violence and so on and so forth, really calls out the need for us as early as we possibly can as a district, and earlier yet with partners in the community to get our hands around what's going on with youth so we can get them on track as fast as we possibly can. You'll hear me say this a couple of times tonight. Highest concentrated poverty in America. So we adopted, if we had just, and people go, that's innovative. No, it's not. It's logical. If we have the highest concentrated poverty in America, the only way to fight that is with concentrated education. And concentrated education for us meant getting as much time as we possibly could with a high quality teacher. It might mean doubling preschool enrollment or early learning opportunities. That gives many more, it gives thousands of kids another year. It could be extending the day, extending summer school, expanding summer school. All those things matter. You will see two things I think that are innovative, people will call innovative, are, as one of our friends, Ryan Smith, will say, is the new coconut water, right? This is one, improvement science. The other one is equity and access. And people all over the state are, Jorge and I were working on issues of equity as a system well over 9 years ago. And people now are they're hiring equity people. I want an equity director. I want an assistant soup of equity. Because they think if they don't have someone with a title, their district is not going to get the work done. That, not tethered to the other kind of work I'm talking about, doesn't work. Just like improvement science, having somebody with a book on their shelf without having a deep understanding of what it actually means is not going to go very far. And boards of education and community leaders are going to say, what have we been doing for the last 3 years? But this is done well, gives you the opportunity over here for rigorous call and orientation to get after longstanding problems. This one, Jorge, thank you, called the iceberg. This is an example of the complex work of equity and access. So if you look at the very top, it says the college match change ideas. And this was Jorge's idea because we have kids who are misaligned, even with all the work we did. They were applying to schools and underselling themselves. Like, wow, this kid has the numbers to apply to Cal, but they're not. And we decided we should try to figure something out about that. So Jorge and his team came up with a nice way to, based on kids who had been admitted the previous year, they took their student profile, their grades, test scores, all the rest of that, and broke out, here are the type of kids who got into UCLA and Cal, Tier 1 UCs. Here's who got into Tier 2 UCs. Here got into Tier 3 UCs. Same thing with CSUs. And then, using their data, sent personalized letters and packets to the families before they do college work, saying, based on how you've done in school and your data, did you know you're eligible for these type of schools? We encourage you to apply. By the way, there are fee waivers. 90% of you living in poverty, there are fee waivers for you to apply for multiple schools, for SAT, blah, 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 blah. That piece right there up top was an idea that Long Beach Unified and Fresno Unified go back and forth on. It caught the attention of Bill Gates. So Jorge over here, I'll just call him out. He got to do an interview in the hallway in Cleveland with Bill Gates. I wasn't at all bitter. I mean, it's fine. It's fine. I mean, we're friends. It's fine. He's never told me how it went, but it's okay. And that wasn't the other thing. The other piece was he then got called up to the Great Northwest, where they actually had a sit down around a table for the Gates notes, and that's posted online. So he's 2-0 up on me with that one. But all Bill saw was that top thing going, that's great. What he didn't see were these different bodies of work that went into play underneath the water, making that tip of the iceberg possible. Couldn't have done it without the master scheduling work. Couldn't have done it without greater high school resources for counseling. Couldn't have done it without administering the SAT during the school day on our campuses, right? So just have to be careful about seeing something without recognizing connections to all.
Just on that too, interestingly enough, something that gets called out all the time is technology and innovation.
Oh yeah.
And you guys had programmers working for you in the district 10 years before any other district was doing that, built your own student information system so that you had control over all the data.
Yep.
But what I always find is interesting is you guys don't really call that out because that was just the means to the end to get to this.
It was baseline. Like you don't go run it without shoes on, right? I mean, I don't know how you run a school or make decisions if you don't have data from which to start. That baffles me. So if I go back to the very first slide, a lot of the work, and I'll wrap up with a story about some schools before some questions here. This is really just comes down to the reason people think things are disruptive is because we have not done the right thing for all children for so long. It is so ingrained in our society that when we try to establish the right thing for all youth, and largely what I'm talking about is those in the minority, whether it's students with disabilities, whether it's English learners, whether it's ethnic minority kids, it does not matter. The kids who have been left out, trying to make invisible kids visible, trying to do right by them, given the way the system's been run for decades, that feels really disruptive to most people who are used to running a system the old status quo way. But I don't go into this thinking I'm trying to break things or I'm trying to disrupt. All I'm trying to do is do basic stuff like the rotary 4-way test. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill? Is it beneficial to all? Or the very last slide, which we all know this, depending on your faith, everybody's got some version of the golden rule in the good book, right? Treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself. Are we treating all youth as though, this is my standard as a superintendent, am I treating every kid in my system as though they're my own kid? If I can't answer that, I got a boatload of work to do. That then feels a little disruptive because you have to start asking some hard questions of folks who not real used to it. So I'll close this by saying the stuff that people see that they would like to say are innovative, the Patino School, which I love, that was a force of people wanted CTE, but they were just saying, we want sheet metal workers, and trying to drag us back to this old place. And it was kind of the, I don't know, the language I was hearing around, let's go back to the way it used to be, the 50s when it was great for everybody. It wasn't great for everybody. And I'm not going to stop at sheet metal's perfectly fine, but that's not going to be my first step. My first step in a world where the knowledge economy is thumping along is my CTE step would be a school for entrepreneurship that lines up with the university system we have. Oh, by the way, I've got a mayor who's come out of the world of entrepreneurship and is driving like heck. I got a business community interested in it. And that's why we did that the way we did it. The charter at the IB school, I'll just tell you this. We started the thing. Oh, and by the way, test scores at your school for not focusing on math and ELA and just doing the interdisciplinary project-based stuff. ELA top?
Second.
Second only to Design Science High School, another specialty program, and right near the top in mathematics. So, and then we started Daily Elementary as a charter school, dramatically extended the school day, almost 2 hours a day. I sat on the board, we kind of backed that off. Teachers were having a hard time, and rightfully so. But we also had a longer school year. And we took kids right from the neighborhood. It was the local neighborhood, poor part of town. And at the end of the first year, now this was a school that was poor performing, and I closed it. Again, on this one, I could have communicated better to my board members. I just had it. I closed it. It was small. Principal said, if you're closing, I'm retiring. Mission accomplished. Small group of teachers got dispersed through the system. Place sat for a little bit, and then I went in, and when some people started to make some noise, like, what are we doing with that school? I spent some money out of our existing bond to do some renovation, and brought it up to snuff. And then we opened this charter. And by doing that, it was our building. It was the right thing to do. When the charter opened, they didn't have to spend all their charter grant on all of that real heavy physical capital stuff. So now they had all the money they needed for training on and on and on for multiple years. And in the first year of existence, they beat all of the 60 plus elementary schools in testing in Fresno Unified, except for elementary grades 2 through 6, which is named for the kids who go there, Manchester Gate. Every student there is gate identified. It's the only school they didn't beat, right? And then I'll just tell you a quick story about previously we had 3 schools under the old federal law where we had to take action. You know, that old close it, I don't know what they were, burn them down. They were pretty bad. It was close it, charter it, do the turnaround model, 51% of your staff. Or alternative model, which I never really understood. So we chose to do the turnaround model, 51% of your staff, have a new leader. Had new leaders there anyway. I won't tell you the whole story, but long story short, we went out, we did it. It was very disruptive to do that kind of work for everybody involved. But after doing the work, we added 30 minutes a day instruction for the kids. We added another teacher to help with the work that's being added to the job. And we added an extra 10 days of professional learning, 2 weeks of professional learning on top of everything else for the teachers. And for that extra time, we paid 10% more. At those 3 schools, they all showed phenomenal results. So now we have a charter school and we have 3 other schools with extended time and additional FTE to help with the data work and more PD for teachers. And they all had a structure built in, the district put in place for accountable communities, PLCs, to work together. Here comes LCFF. And we went right to the bargaining table and said, we've got struggling elementary schools, struggling youth. We want to do designated schools where we extend instruction 30 minutes a day, add a teacher, add 10 days of PD.
For how many schools?
40 of the 60 elementary. So we got a little aggressive. Thank you for that. I did acquiesce and phase in. We did 10 one year, 20 the next, 10 the third. And they all got paid 10% more. So now we have a split salary schedule for teachers. About 30%, 31% of the teachers are making 10% more than their colleagues, but they're working longer. Those schools already are showing year over year growth. that exceeds the other schools. They're higher than the 90% poverty. They're at like 95, 96%, higher EL. The other elementaries are down around 82%, and they're not moving as fast. So it's a way to try to use what you found to be successful somewhere else and try to get it to scale, but we baked it into the contract. And, those are the kind of things that I think were more innovative. The only reason I call it more innovative was because we hit more kids. We got 40 schools worth out of that. And that's going to stick. The year before I left was the first time, our state testing came back that all of our grades tested in ELA and math, both, they all improved. Instead of having, oh God, third grade slipped again, fourth grade math fell, they all moved up. And the National Assessment of Education Progress just came out and was released in the last day or so. And Fresno Unified was one of few districts. They test fourth and eighth grade reading and math, and they improved pretty significantly in 3 of the 4. And they were one of just a couple that were able to do that. So it really does matter, but you've got to stay on it. And they're going to have to, in my view, they will have to keep those designated schools protected downstream, really as a way to protect the youth so that they have options. Now, if you think about it, the last thing I'll say about designated schools, 30 minutes a day works out to 18 more days of instruction per year. You enter a designated school, and even if you're transient, you move to another school, you're probably going to move to another designated school because they're largely in the same parts of town. We set up a system, I believe, where the vast majority of students who enroll are going to end up with almost 7 months, at least 6 months of additional instruction before they walk into a middle school, just by virtue of those 30 minutes a day. You add that up over 6-7 years from preschool or kinder going forward, and it matters. So I know I've gone really long, but I wanted to tie some of the individual school stuff to the bigger system stuff because I think it matters dramatically.
So here's what I'm excited. We didn't even talk about core schools. We didn't even talk, I can think of 7 or 8 things we didn't even talk about. But what I'm excited about is I wanted people to see what a disruptor does and things like, and I think that that's been really evident today. I just want to say, having worked for you, one of the great things is I've heard all of this 15 times because it's communicated so well to your leaders. In a system where you have over 100 principals, to take a vision and put it down to the classroom is very difficult. But I'm inspired tonight listening to you and just appreciate the work you do for kids and hope to see more of it. And glad that we have some remnants of that work here now in Sacramento. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Let's give Michael Hanson a round of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you very much.